My guest for concert night is someone who has been an intermission guest with us before, one of my oldest and dearest musical friends, Emile Naoumoff. Emile, welcome to concert night. Welcome back to concert night for your second interview.
Thank you for inviting me again.
For those who don't remember, Emile was with us for a concert. It was very early in the run of concert night. I think this is our 77th program, and I think I interviewed Emile on the 6th program of the series, way back at the beginning of the pandemic lockdown. And we aired a concert from some years ago when he gave just a wonderful performance of the Grieg Piano Concerto. And Emile is back today, not as a soloist, but as an expert of sorts on the composer whose music opened our concert tonight, Lili Boulanger. And we will speak about Lili in a few minutes, but we should start a little bit with maybe our personal history, because Emile and I go back. I did the math. It's not quite 50 years, but it's almost 50 years. And I think three summers we will reach the 50-year mark of knowing each other. When I was 19 years old, after my sophomore year in college, I went to France for the summer to study with Nadia Boulanger at the American Conservatory in Fontainebleau. So I was there at the age of 19, and Emile was there at the age of 9. And somehow across the decade of age separation, we became friends and have been friends ever since. And I have some pictures of him in short pants with a sheriff's badge that are very embarrassing, but we won't show them right now to the radio audience. So Emile, can you tell us a little bit of, in your personal history, how you came to be a student of Nadia Boulanger at the ripe old age of 7 or 8 or whatever it was?
Yes, it was 7. I was brought out of the Iron Curtain, Bulgaria, to audition for Mademoiselle Boulanger in Paris. And after a short audition where I played for her a little bit of Bach, a little bit of Mozart, I played for her a little bit of my minuet that I had composed. And after these 3 excerpts, she turned to my father and said, I want the little one to study with me 10 years from now, every day. And she was 84. And we were not knowing given what will happen the next day, since we were literally hanging on a very thin rope in our finances, and not to mention the situation of the passports. I mean, everything was totally iffy, but she was adamant. And it was marvelous that she trusted, believed, and respected me so much that she offered me the lessons, and that she guided me through basically from childhood to teenager, almost 9 years and a half of a journey which remains probably the most intense part of my life.
And it was the most intense part of my life too, during the 4-year period that I was working with her. So I can imagine, as young as you were, it must have just been a whirlwind of experience for you.
It was incredible because I was aware that she was a person of the century of before. And she was in the postscriptum of her life. I thought that she could die every day. And I was so worried because so much was expected of me by her. And harmony, contrapoint, and fugue, but also composition, analysis, and keyboard harmony. And this kind of regimen of total immersion in music making at all levels, sight reading, transposing, trans everything. And with Mademoiselle Dieudonné, her alter ego, the nuclear amounts of solfège for the musical grammar that was so important. And in fact, she told my father that the little one is thirsty and we should give him to drink right away. instead of waiting for him to grow up and then enter in a school. So I was a child prodigy of sorts, but not in the eyes of Mademoiselle Boulanger. I was an old little man. He treated me with incredible respect and high expectation, and no touchy-feely feelings. It was always about respecting the music, respecting the integrity of music making, pulse, phrasing, direction, meaning. It wasn't just craftsmanship versus art, it was craftsmanship within art. And so every of my lessons was divided in 3 portions. First was my assignments, harmony, and the sequences and all these elements of voice leading that I had to master in order to compose with a freer thought. That was her opinion. Then the second part of the lesson, I was playing for her the pieces for piano that she assigned me to learn as a pianist, which included well-tempered clavier copied by hand from memory from the score on parts with clefs. So it was a very musician piano approach, not only technique for itself in terms of velocity, but also the musicianship of the piano playing, the layered hearing, the articulations, all the details. And then the third hour, which was my favorite, of course, those hours were 90 minutes each. So,
Right.
nevertheless, in the third portion of the lesson, that was, I always feel this respect was incredible because there was always a prepared book or two of medieval, Renaissance, motets, or whatever it is, contemporary music, Stravinsky's Persephone. It didn't have to be chronological, but it was gems I had to sight read in front of her, with a page marked with my name on it, Emilka. And so I started sight reading. And because I was relatively comfortable as a child without that perhaps adolescent, discomfort to be with somebody so famous, I knew she was famous, but I felt some kind of proximity when discovering music, commenting it while sight reading it, and her correcting my comments, which ended it by saying, if you don't like it the way he wrote it, you should write your own. Because I would say, why did Bach not use a tonal answer in this fugue in D minor from Book 1? He uses the real answer. And I decided to play it with a tonal answer as if I was going to fix Bach's choice of fugue writing. And so after an amused moment, she looked at me and she said exactly that. She says, don't say you don't like it, say you don't understand it. Don't say you want to transform it, write your own. And when you play his, play exactly what he meant. And so in this sense, I was brought up between composition, which was my daily necessity. The creativity of the composition was in perfect contrapoint with the very strict rules of the writing that I had to apply. So it was very incredible that for a child, she allowed me to understand the difference between forbidden as a rule for keyboard harmony writing or even notated, or what is then tolerated or allowed in my composition. So the very perfect parallel fifths that were forbidden in the first hour of the lesson were praised in the third hour of the lesson. And I thought that was a very liberating feeling of expectation to learn why you have to go through the restrictions instead of just obeying them. And in that sense, I think she was very much of a guide, more than only a teacher of the know-how. He was more a guide of the how to think about what you do in your trade.
Now, something you said, it was all very interesting, but something in particular I found really interesting, and I'd never thought of it before. When you said that she treated you like an old man who was little,
Yeah, exactly.
I think it made a tremendous difference in the way that the older students looked at you, because she treated you exactly as she treated us, maybe even a little more strictly than she treated us. And so it sort of obliged us from the very beginning to think of you as a fellow student of our own cohort, even though you were, 10 years younger than me and 30 years younger than some of the other students. We accepted you as one of us because she treated us all the same. And I'd never thought of that before, but I think it made for a very healthy way for you to be integrated into the larger class.
In hindsight, this touches my heart more than you can imagine because in those days, then I didn't know how I was perceived. I was just in it. And I always worried in the late years as a teacher myself, in my turn, that perhaps I was perceived as an arrogant little, idiot savant. And the truth is that when Mademoiselle Boulanger considered, and this is a good link with Lili, the child in music, she always had in mind Lili. Because she was 13 when Lili was 6 at the death of their father, and she was the student of the Paris Conservatory, and Lili, bedridden with her disease, was missing regular school as well as music school. And so Mademoiselle Boulanger, from the day one of my lessons when I was 7, kept giving me assignments that she gave to Lili. And she kept referring, quasi 6 decades after all this has happened and Lili has gone, when I arrived in her life, she kept telling me, I don't understand. Why don't you hear, in that sense, for her it meant guess, the right harmonizations of a given Massenet figured bass that I gave to Lili? And Lili always guessed it. And I was very puzzled by this because, as you know, the apartment was filled with these busts on sculpture of Lili on each fireplace of her many fireplaces in the apartment.
Right. Her apartment was a virtual shrine to,
Yes.
to Lili's memory and pictures of her at various stages in her life.
And the fact that she was on a sculpture made her so timeless, almost like in a museum, beyond even the pictures that were there. And after 1 year or 2 of struggling very much with the basic harmonic progressions, I told her one day spontaneously, I must be a defective Lili.
And what did she say to that?
I was a child, obviously, so I spoke as a child, and she told me, gifted as you are, not guessing or hearing or therefore intuitively connecting the harmonic progressions from the hint of the figured bass, she says, proves that you come from a Slavic country, because I came from Bulgaria. Whenever Lili and her, she says, were sight reading Fauré songs after dinner when they were visiting at the house, and Nadia would sight read or probably transpose sight reading keyboard harmony style, as you know, songs of Fauré, who brought them for dinner at the Boulangers to read or sing by the 2 sisters of whom Lili sang the songs at sight reading them. So when you're immersed in the Fauré land for Lili, and I was immersed in Balkan land, inevitably I had a cultural shock musically. I didn't hear the augmented fifths naturally. I didn't hear the complex 7th chords, especially the half diminished ones. In other words, she acknowledged that I don't have intuitively been immersed in the music of, let's say, Gounod, or of the music in which they grew up as children. Lili was born in 1893 and Nadia in 1887.
So it's interesting, again, something I never knew and something that strikes me knowing it now. In a way, Lili, as a young child, was a little bit like Nadia's first pupil.
Totally.
And then towards the end of her life, she has this other child who comes into her life. And it's easy to see how she could see that these were like bookends students in her career.
We would go in further into that because her mother, their mother, being Russian, Raisa Micetsky, the ostinato of the harmonic roots of composition, so specific to Slavic music, in particular Russian, was something of a duality in these girls who studied in the Forêt school of the melodic moving bass lines. And it's interesting to observe that the first thing I composed was a concerto for piano and orchestra while I was her student, when I was 9 and premiered when I was 10, conducted by Menuhin, whom she invited for the performance to conduct. And of course, I wrote it with my instinctive memory of Bulgaria, which was a lot of ostinato. And she didn't criticize me by saying, it's bad, it's wrong, you should not do this because you should adopt the French style of the melodic bass line instead of the static bass line. She told me about the reasons that make me do that. And she said, in the next piece, try to be more fluent in flowing in your bass line. So fast forward, she dies October 22nd, 1979. And one of her assistants, Mademoiselle Armagnac, passed me a score of a piece that she composed in 1918, but she never spoke of her own music in reverence to her sister's music. But this is Nadia's own music called To the New Life, Vers la Vie Nouvelle. And when I started sight reading it, and it's like a do or C in English, ostinato through the whole first half of the piece, written by herself when she was young. Well, she was in her mid-20s at that point. I realized that for her, discovering in the rapport of the childhood student Lili and Emile, that we both and herself had also this influence of the Russian aspect of music inspiration, which also Lili has, as well as Nadia in her own music. And so that brought me to light even more so to understand how she must have felt at that point when I was a young child, realizing the influences that are, subconscious or even not, totally unconscious. But she never tried to make me become a Fauré composer or to become a Stravinsky composer, despite of the fact that the two were on the top of her pantheon. And of course, I was influenced by them, but it wasn't like as if she was very cautious and respectful to not mess with the intuitive, let's say, creativity that I had even as a child. In that sense, I am so always very in debt for her respect for me and my difference.
I think you're right. I've spoken about this many times with our mutual good friend Robert Rodriguez, and Robert he says it in different ways, but it's like she wanted to make sure that each composer she worked with didn't become like another composer, but became themselves. And it seemed she was always strategizing ways to critique your composition in a way that would push you towards being yourself rather than towards being someone else, which is an art, especially when you know as much music as she does. And it was part of the magic of her teaching. Let's talk a little bit about Lili Boulanger for listeners who don't know Lili very much, and perhaps maybe D'un matin de printemps, of a spring morning, which our concert began with, might be the very first piece they've ever heard by Lili Boulanger. Do you have any perspectives you'd like to share with our listeners about Lili and her music and where it fits in what came before and maybe what came after?
So first, for the placement of her presence in the continuum of French music tradition, since you asked that question so clearly. I would like to answer by saying Debussy. I would like to say Fauré, but in a lesser way. And mostly, I think what characterizes her harmonic language is a way to escape the expected harmonization of the style of the day. When I say Debussy, she avoids the full tone scale, but it's more about unresolved resonances of dissonances which are already consonant by that time. They don't need to be tone centered. It's coloristic, chordal blossomings. And this very piece, Le Matin de Printemps, is part of a diptyque, as they say in French, of a two-side coin of the same, two sides of the same coin. It was an assignment that Nadia gave her, which was to write a piece that represents the sadness, the darkness, the austere, profound expression of mysticism even, on the theme of the minor third.
And that's D'un soir triste, of a sad evening.
And then to treat the same piece, thematically, into a very light mood, fresh, representing the birth of or rebirth of nature after winter in the spring. And so it was more like an assignment on atmospheric writing rather than only development of a thought thematically. Another assignment that she gave her was the theme and variations, which she started in 1913 in the Rome's Villa Medici, where Nadia gave her an assignment exactly how to treat the theme in each of the variations. It's almost like as if Mademoiselle Nadia Boulanger was a crossword puzzle master, and she was creating puzzles for her sister to solve creatively.
So that's interesting, because one of the things that I wondered was, and this is just a question out of the air, but I was curious because of their close personal relationship and a little bit of the student-teacher relationship. I was curious how much of Lili's music Nadia had her fingers in one way or another. And curious, it's interesting because with so many composers later in her life, she seemed to really try not to meddle with the composer's intent. But I wondered, do you think with Lili, in situations like that she was more involved? Or did she let Lili be Lili, so to speak?
This question is fundamental and so subtly clairvoyant. Thank you. You rightfully touched the fact that she was a teenager and a young woman when Lili was a child becoming a teenager during the formative years of Lili musically. And when Lili dies in 1918, at the age of 24, Nadia is 30. And then she starts teaching 3 years later in 21, Copland as a first American student in the Fontainebleau School where we met later.
Yes.
And I think that the fact that between Lili's death and the American Conservatory in 21, and take on the side Raoul Pugnot, her mentor and partner in composition, who had died also before World War I, in a few very short years between Lili's Rome Prize of 13, death in 18, and Nadia found herself in front of a really crossroads. And I think that she chose willingly to abandon her own compositional career and become solely a teacher. And I think that the teacher she was from 21 onwards was the teacher you described, whom I knew also later when we knew her. The one who gives you the guidelines, the clairvoyant, visionary view of what are the weaknesses of your writing compared to what you intended to produce. Not just lengths, shortnesses, form, but also about details which fuel the general feel of flow of the compositional thought. So she would always detect by intuition what are the weaknesses in what the composer students wanted to express, rather than ask them to rewrite it the way she would have done it because of her know-how. So she never did that. But with Lili, she did exactly that. It was as if she was impatient with Lili because Lili was very gifted intuitively for music. We can call it talent, genius, but not so much craftsmanship. And while Lili was a baby, Nadia was already attending Fauré's compositional class as a child. And so inevitably, what I noticed in the scores that I saw for like this theme and variations, it's very clear that Nadia was a very strict mentor for Lili, shaping her thoughts. And the writing of the two sisters is different in the notation, so it's easy to figure out who wrote what. But I must say that there must have been a point where Nadia was already discovering that she had that intuition about somebody else's creativity, which made her to be the teacher of the century, really, after that. But with Lili, it was too close to be comfortable to that. And I think that because Lili was bedridden and very often not able to pursue a consistent effort, intellectual or physical, to do assignments and all these things, I think that Nadia doctored a little bit of Lili's pieces. And not only the famously known Last Pie Jesu, which was supposedly dictated from the deathbed of Lili to Nadia. And when you dictate to somebody, little is known how much of the dictation is thoroughly there and how much you added to make it according to your taste. But my opinion is that she admired Lili's creativity, and the more she discovered Lili's creativity, the more she felt herself a little bit, let's say, her own shortcomings became very evident. And that translated in telling us at our time that she said, my music is very well written, but boring. With knowledge, but without inventivity, creativity, inspiration. Whenever I think that being so close to somebody who, in fact, Lili composed melodically and harmonically, intuitively, in ways that was disarming Nadia. And because the fact that Nadia tried twice the Rome Prize and twice failed, the last time in 2009, and then her sister tries it the first time and succeeds to win it in 2013, I think was a little bit of a blow to Nadia in terms of her own compositional aspirations. And so I think that she didn't doctor the pieces of composers like Jean Francais, like all of us actually who are around her. But for Lili, she did. And the assignments and the corrections and the suggestions, and there's a factual evidence at the end of the score of the manuscript of the Lili Boulanger's theme and variation. Lili writes OUF, 3 points of exclamation, pronounced in French, ouf, which is an exclamation style of a sigh, of relief. Oh, I'm done with it.
Thank God it's over.
Yes. And I think that And that is certainly her own writing, because it's clearly there, compared to Nadia's advices for each variation with her own writing. And so it feels to me like it must have been very difficult for Nadia to observe Lili blossoming while Nadia was trying to teach her the know-how. And I think the two must have clashed at some point.
I would imagine that, especially as Lily got older and
Exactly.
became a teenager herself, and probably just as strong-willed as teenagers always are. It's always interesting because in recent years there was that box set of songs of Nadia's that was published, and they're very beautiful songs, and I love listening to them. But I always think when I hear music of Lily's, I hear a spark in the music and an imagination, and it feels like Nadia's compositions are within the box of what's expected, and that Lili is already thinking of what's on the other side of the box and how to get to it. And I think that's what's so amazing about her music.
I think that once we take apart the fact of the early death, once we take apart the fact of Nadia being the famous pedagogue, when we hear the Matin de Printemps, we hear something as incredibly free in its expression, melodic, harmonic, structural by group bars and all, as we hear in a tone poem like La Mer by Debussy.
And it's only 6 or 7 minutes.
And it's not even exactly.
It's so compact, but it feels like, yeah.
When you read Debussy's early music, when Debussy was in his 20s, his music was not as flowing as Lili at his age. And in my opinion, it must have been a very challenging time, because during the year before the beginning of World War I in 1914, Nadia Boulanger's co-written with Pugnot opera, The Dead City, on D'Annunzio's text, was to be premiered in that September of 14 in the Paris Opera. But because the World War I started August 1st, everything was cancelled. Now, at the same time, after World War I started, Lili was writing Princesse Malène, her own opera, on a text by Maeterlinck, whom recorded his edition after sensing the sensation, the first woman Rome Prize winner, Lili. They redirected Maeterlinck's text from Debussy after Péléas to Lili for the Princesse Malène. And this is a little bit of a striking fact that you could imagine, with the veneration that Nadia had for Lili, that after the war, understandably now we understand that she considered her own music not very original or meaningful, she would have done anything possible to have Lili's Princesse Malène completed and performed, even if it was half finished during her short life. The way she completed the string quartet by Fauré, third movement of the Opus 121, when Fauré asked her to consider if it's possible to be published, but not unfinished, because he only wrote the first two movements. So if she did that for Fauré, why didn't she do that for her sister, in memory of her sister? She should have. But this remains a mystery, because nobody has found the score of this, which in the notes of the diaries of Lili clearly indicates that she completed the first act on piano and was starting the orchestration when she died, which is 18. And so, is it because of Nadia's own opera's non-blossoming, non-existence, that she preferred to keep Lili's unfinished, never heard? It's difficult to know, because perhaps she was tempted to complete it, and then it would have been really a piece of the Boulanger sisters.
It would have been, yes.
And I think that she was desperately trying to avoid that, at least openly after the formative years of Lili. And I think the key person in this sisters, composers, competitive milieu was the mother, Raissa, who was so young when she had her daughters, between 18 and 20 something, when the father was in his 70s, that in fact, without the father, they were a little bit closer to three sisters living together, with the older sister being Raissa, the young mom, directing very harshly the household, and Nadia earning the money for the household by teaching harmony. And Lili just given the opportunity to blossom her musicianship. And I think there is something to say to that, because according to what I understood from Mademoiselle Boulanger herself, they did have two younger sisters who died at the age of 1 each from crib death.
Yes.
And that until 1935, when Raissa dies, Nadia sleeps in the same room as her mother, as an adult woman herself, saying that Raissa wanted to make sure that she doesn't stop breathing during the night, even when she was in her 40s. And so it seems to me like in this situation of the timing of the events, between the fact that the girls lost their father so young in age themselves, and the mother was still very young. And I think that Nadia was in a situation of this trio where she was the breadwinner, the fatherly figure for the young and free-thinking child who, in fact, Lili didn't have the awareness of the tragedy as much because she was so younger. And Nadia was, I think, carrying on her shoulders so much weight at all levels for this situation to have been healthy for her. I think she found probably the best solution, which is to erase her own music from becoming important, Nadia's, and refusing to complete Lili's opera by probably destroying it. Since now the musicians, the musicologists who had access to documents of the French library didn't find it.
Emile, thank you so much for those really fascinating perspectives about Lili Boulanger and her music. I was very tempted to put D'un Matin de Printemps and D'un Soir Triste together on the program, but then I thought, first, it would make the program a little too long, but second, I thought, no, introduce people to one piece, and then we'll play the other piece, which is so different, another year, and it will give them more perspective, and hopefully the audience will then want to hear more and more of Lili's music, because I hope we can do that in future years.
Between what you mentioned and what she thought about this piece, I know it because of the violin piano version of it, which I played for her, of the Deux Matins de Printemps,
yes,
together with the Nocturne and Cortège. And for me, it represented, by 3 independently written pieces, a short type of sonata, or a suite in 3 movements, if you want, for violin and piano. And when I discovered, which she didn't mention, I discovered in my own the D'un Soir Triste. I asked her, why can't we play it with the violin? Because she made it for piano trio to be playable with cello. But she told me, because Deux Matins de Printemps is the best thing she wrote.
And it is a wonderful piece.
And I don't think that she wanted the two, even if it was an assignment for Lili from Nadia, to be, probably she must have found that the most complete qualities piece that she wrote is the Matin de Printemps, and the orchestration version proves it so much.
Yes, it is. It's an absolutely brilliant piece and just a real gem. And you're a real gem, Emile. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your personal history into the tangled web of, well, it wasn't Chekhov's Three Sisters, but that's a fascinating take on the household after Ernest died. So I look forward to seeing you again in person sometime soon. Hopefully we'll have you back to play with the Philharmonic again. We'll talk about that and come up with some plans for the future, I hope.
It was a pleasure to revisit the Boulangerie with Neal, for whom I have such admiration, and I think that Mademoiselle Boulanger's attitude towards musicians was based on admiration, students or colleagues. I don't think she loved without to admire. And I understood that more so as a teacher myself, and I have this infinite admiration for your own musicianship, teaching pedagogically through your conducting, without to mention it, but you do it. And that brings such an incredible depth and perspective to the rehearsal of an orchestra. Beyond the technique to put it together is the meaning behind every musical sentence that you put in. Every time I have heard you conduct when I visited to play, I always thought about this extraordinary pedagogical dimension that you introduce in your programming and your conducting. And in that sense, you're really disciple of Mademoiselle Boulanger. So,
well, thank you.
Very honored to say that to our audience.
You're so kind. Thanks, Emile.